Welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Puzzle. In this episode, my guest is Javad Keypour, an Iranian professional based in Tallinn, Estonia. Javad Keypour is a climate and energy expert. His experience spans sustainable energy and geopolitics, energy security, and natural gas technologies. Keypour has worked for the Office of the Vice President of Science and Technology of Iran as an expert in energy markets for 5 years. Currently, he is a part of the Climate and Energy Program at the Stockholm Environment Institute in Estonia. In this episode, we discuss about the impact of the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia with the support of China and its repercussions in the Middle East. Dear Javad, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well. Javad, it's a pleasure to have you today in this episode for my new podcast, The Geopolitical Puzzle, to discuss interesting topics related to energy, gas, oil in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. Javad, we know that both regions are very volatile, the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. And we know there are two critical key players. One is Saudi Arabia and another is Iran. I would like to ask you, why are Iran and Saudi Arabia important when we talk about energy?
So first of all, thank you for having me today, and it's a pleasure to be invited by this podcast. And definitely, this is a very important topic that you are pointing out, especially because not just because always there has been some energy geopolitical issues in the Persian Gulf, but also because even though we have Ukraine war as one of the very important geopolitical issues in the world, but still Persian Gulf and the interactions between Iran and the United States over there, and then of course we have Israel and all the other trans-regional actors. There has been always the importance of this region in the news, and yeah, this is something I don't expect it's gonna go down in the news in the near future. So, as you pointed out, we have two important actors in the region, Iran and Saudi Arabia. I can argue from three different perspectives that why these two in particular are important. First of all, historically, Iran and Saudi Arabia are known as the founders of the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, the OPEC. And even though there has been critics on the OPEC, either it is irrelevant or influential or inactive in two sides, actor in the oil market. Nevertheless, we have still OPEC, and it has some decision, and we can still see that how a decision by OPEC can impact the global oil market. And then not just this, but within the OPEC, we have had two sort of actors known as the hawks and doves, those who support higher price or supporting higher share. So higher share is protected by Saudi Arabia, and then Iran is always one supporter to higher prices. So even inside the OPEC, we have had this sort of interaction and headed by Iran in one side and Saudi Arabia in the other side. Then, if we focus on the statistics, statistics shows that Saudi Arabia is the second reservoir owner in the world. Almost 16% of the total world oil is concentrated in Saudi Arabia. Just in one case, we have the biggest oil field in the Persian Gulf in the territory of Saudi Arabia called Qawar oil field. Or for Iran, it's almost 10%, a bit less than that. But yeah, to simplify it, it's 10%, and Iran is the fourth reservoir owner in the world. And then the third reason is basically Iran's role in controlling the Strait of Hormuz. We know that how tensions again has been escalating in the Hormuz Strait recently. So the United States has its fifth fleet, Navy fleet in Persian Gulf region, located in Bahrain, the island. And traditionally, especially after the UK withdrew from Persian Gulf region back to 1950s and early 60s after the Suez Canal crisis, I don't want to go to the very, very details. So then gradually we know that the US replaced there. And still, even though there has been arguments that the US presence paradigm has changed or has been changing technically in the Persian Gulf, but still it's the US who is from the Western side in charge of guaranteeing the free flow of oil in one side in the Persian Gulf, and the other side, technically, Iran is in charge of controlling the Strait of Hormuz. So even though that Iran is being sanctioned by the US, I mean, the oil export is now under the sanction after Donald Trump walked away from JCPOA, the nuclear deal. But still, because of Iran's role in the region, I think it's very crucial player in the Persian Gulf region. So based on these three arguments, I think that these two are the most important ones.
Let's focus a little bit in Iran. The country has problems, let's see, with inflation, probably the sanctions that you mentioned right now, the controversial nuclear problems, etc., and so on. What is the main challenge Iran is facing today in terms of energy?
Well, this is again another critical question, and I would say that we can divide these sort of challenges to two forms: the external ones and the internal one, the domestic issues. The energy intensity, first of all, from the very domestic perspective in Iran, is a bit high. And even the CO2 intensity, meaning that the amount of CO2 that is released based on for producing $1 added value, $1 actual GDP, let's say, is a bit high. Iran is among the top 10 emitters based on the indicator of CO2 intensity, and then on the energy intensity as well. So we have, in a nutshell, we have the energy inefficiency in Iran, which has been accelerated by different factors. I can say, like the energy price, like the mismanagement, like the flawed structure, managerial structure. So all in all, this makes it always not so easy to manage the energy system in Iran. We know that in the recent years, Iran has some difficulties in managing electricity market balanced in summertime, especially because it becomes very hot. And then in the winter, it's the story of natural gas. Although Iran is known as the second biggest natural gas owner in the world, so it's a kind of surprise then to see that Iran has some problems on this. But from external perspective, it's definitely the sanctions. So after Islamic Revolution in early 1979, then we had the first crisis between Iran and the United States. Occupation of the American embassy in Tehran, which is known as the Tehran crisis, and then you know that how gradually the sanctions by the United States started to be imposed against Iran. Of course, shortly after that, we had Iran-Iraq war, which initiated by Saddam Hussein, and then for 8 years, Iran's infrastructure have been bombarded by Saddam Hussein and under the Ba'ath regime. Shortly after that, when Iran wanted to actually have the development of its economy, especially based on its oil, gas, and petrochemical industry, it faced with the first significant investment sanction in Iran called the Iran-Libya Sanction Act later, which wanted to, by the United States, wanted to reframe any sort of investment in Iran oil and gas industry up to $40 million, which was then extended to $20 million, which these sort of numbers are almost nothing. This is not a big money. So technically, it meant by that time that Iran intention for attracting foreign investment was highly limited by the United States, and this sort of sanction has have been extended year by year. I don't want to go to the detail. Yeah.
Javad, your answer leads me to talk about a third player, China. First of all, it's important to mention that on March 6th, 2023, after 7 years of hostility and conflicts between Iran and Saudi Arabia, they agreed to end this conflict and restore relationships with the support of China. What is this deal about it? What are your thoughts? Why China is involved in these crucial countries in the region?
That's true. We have had such an important event, which made many scholars surprised, to be honest, because it was somehow unexpected. At least it was going on without any prior significant signal. So, if I claim that many people did not expect such a thing happening in the midst of all the tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, it's not far from the truth. But I would like to mention here that before that, during the previous presidency time in Iran, during Hassan Rouhani's time, Iran signed an agreement with a long-term agreement with China, which the details have not been revealed to the media. There has been some estimations that what can be inside, but anyway, this has not been officially confirmed by Iran or nor China. So I see this event, I mean, China's role in mediation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, in line with previous China's activities in the Persian Gulf region for extending its investment and approaching to Saudi Arabia in one side, and on the other side to Iran, definitely, because again, it's not far from truth to
Yeah.
claim that China has
Correct.
been, if not the biggest, but obviously one of the biggest winners out of the sanctions by the U.S. against Iran,
Mhm.
because then Iran inclined more and more to China. So, for having the mediation, for having this authority, technically, the one who is the mediator should have influence and footprint in both sides. And then I think if we consider this, it's not a surprise, I mean, regardless of the time, how China was the only one who could facilitate the resumption of relation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There has been some claims again and again, estimations by scholars saying that technically China wanted to be assured that if they put investment in Saudi Arabia in particular, due to the role of Iran in on Houthis in Yemen, for instance, it's not gonna be affected. So it was a win-win deal for all the three countries. So China can be assured that its investment in Saudi Arabia, which is, I think, not so comparable with its investment in Iran, is not going to be jeopardized by Iran over there. And we can see as a testimony for that how actually the tension in Yemen has been going down after this deal. But again, I should emphasize that not much has been released out of the details of this deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Javad, speaking about geopolitics, what implications could China's presence have in the region because you have mentioned Yemen, we have Israel, and on the other side, we have all the monarchies around the Persian Gulf. But speaking specifically in energy industry, what is the implication of China's presence there?
Yes, it definitely depends on our perception out of China's play and role in the Persian Gulf. Some believe that China will at some point turn to a security player and security actor in the region. But what we can see so far is that China tries to prioritize its energy and economy in a wider sense, interest in the region. This will bring some repercussion, meaning that if the relationship between China and Iran are tightened more and more, then definitely we can expect that Iran's resilience against the sanctions by the West would be strengthened in one side. In the other side, this is true about the China and Saudi Arabia relationship that it's beneficial for both sides in a sense that Saudi Arabia will diversify its energy partners and then it can have higher freedom of action against its traditional allies, in particular the United States. As we can see, even that, for example, Biden tried to approach bin Salman and the king in order to convince them shortly after invasion of Ukraine to increase the oil production, but then technically somehow Saudi Arabia refused, if not officially. So there has been even some ideas if Saudi Arabia at some point would be convinced to sell oil in yuan. This hasn't happened technically, but anyway, I think that China's higher presence in the Persian Gulf will have repercussion not just for the region but also for others, in particular the traditional allies like the United States.
I totally agree with you. This global power competition is always present among many countries, but in this particular situation, it's more complicated. Let's extrapolate this situation, this trilateral agreement, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China, to Ukraine, to the conflict in Ukraine. Will this deal have any repercussions in the Ukrainian Russia conflict, in your opinion?
I see it mostly an indirect repercussion, and I can see a testimony like Saudi Arabia's role in mediation in the Ukraine war that happened just very recently, as we can see that in Jeddah there was the summit between different parties. Of course, Russia was not invited there, but this happened almost shortly after the time that President Zelensky had a meeting with Arab summits. In my perspective, again, back to my previous answers, this deal was a guarantee to Saudi Arabia that to attract more and more China's investment over there, which will directly empower Saudi Arabia and gives it a higher role in not just in the energy market but also in the political atmosphere. I think if like 10, 15 years ago, it was not that much imaginable that somebody like Saudi Arabia can play as a mediator in trans-regional conflicts like in Ukraine. But we see it, of course. I cannot descend it just to the energy, but obviously, if we consider how oil revenue and energy industry has a role in Saudi Arabian national economy, and then in a broader perspective, its national power, then we can argue that this is technically helps Saudi Arabia as a piece of the bigger puzzle that Mohammed bin Salman wants to pretend and to show Saudi Arabia as a big player, not just in the region but also even beyond.
Worldwide. Oh, I see. Javad, you are a researcher and a specialist in energy who knows the region or the Middle East region very well. Let's talk about energy security or stability. We talk about Europe, right? I have in my hands right now a very important paper from the European Council on Foreign Relations. They talk pretty much what Saudi and Iran deal means for the Middle East and Europe. And one of the page mentioned very interesting. Say, the deal opens doors for Europe to enhance its own regional influence in support of this goal. Europeans will not be enormous players in shaping a political and security agenda in the Middle East, but they can reimagine the ideas to settle and gain from this deal in terms of cooperation. So, in your opinion, you are living in Europe. How should the European work to protect this kind of energy security or stability related to this deal?
That's a kind of million-dollar question. I wanted to start with a background, opening a background on what's going on the energy side. There has been reports arguing that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, European Union, due to its policy for replacing Russian oil, has adopted a policy to import more oil from the Persian Gulf region, and on top of all, Saudi Arabia. So I think this shows that at least for a while, until the time that the EU's initiative for the energy transition and decarbonizing its economy, which will result in much lower share of oil. Until that time, until we see it in a very tangible way, EU has to think more carefully about its relations with petrostates in the Persian Gulf region. But the point is that, as we started, or even in our discussion, that Saudi Arabia and Arab states of the Persian Gulf are in one side, but on the other side we have Iran, and then it will be too naive if we think that because right now European Union is not importing any oil from Iran, then it's independent and it doesn't need Iran. Because, as I mentioned, on top of different factors, Iran's control on the Strait of Hormuz is something which will not be changed by the sanctions. And then, if we focus on Iran's side, the Iran EU relationship, right now I see the EU is in a strong and fierce dilemma, because on one side, as I mentioned, EU has to deal with Iran, but on the other side, between Iran and EU, there are some important issues, including the Iran's nuclear program, which we can see that how EU has almost lost its position and place in playing as a mediator in between the United States and Iran on the other side. Even just as a point in the fringe, I can say that at some point after President Raisi came into power, for a time, it was Russia who was playing as the mediator in between, and we could see it. Back to my main argument, between the two sides, we have the nuclear program, which I feel EU has almost gradually lost its place. Then there is the missile program. Of course, there is the Iran-Israel tensions, which EU always tried to mediate or to play a role. And then, very recently, we have two other additional factors. One is the political instabilities in Iran. Demonstration happened last year, and we have had the strong lobbies of Iranian in Europe on European Union leaders. They are asking the leaders to stop dealing with Islamic Republic in Tehran and to limit that. So now I think that European Union cannot omit this role and this power. And on the other side, something I can claim as a heresy in the political sphere happening, and that's Iran's role in the Ukraine war. There have been reports claiming that Iran is supplying Russia by drones. Iran has its own, I mean, the Islamic Republic has its own narration out of the whole story. I'm not going to go into the details, who is right, who is wrong. But anyway, there has been these reports, and EU has to deal with this. So it's a very, very strange dilemma for the EU that it cannot neglect it, but it has to also consider Iran's role in the region and to find a solution, medium solution in between, how to protect its interest, especially energy interest coming from the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe in a nutshell, the best thing is that if EU leaves the communication channels open and uses the public diplomacy in order to gradually decrease the potential of tension with Tehran, and to adopt a strategic patient policy in order to see how the situation will be evolve in the future, but not to do something very, very strong or not so reasonable in order to increase the tension.
I see. An interesting point to observe will be the dialogue between these regional actors, right? So, Javad, is there anything else you would like to add to this conversation?
Well, I think I've already shared what I wanted to say, but to as a follow-up to the last question, I want to say that the Persian Gulf cannot be omitted, cannot be neglected on the pretext of any other sort of tension or political event going on. Either it's in the Far East, in between Taiwan and China, or in Ukraine war, or even some domestic issues like the upcoming election in the United States, or Euroscepticism in Europe, immigration crisis whatsoever. And this is not just about the oil or gas or energy. The whole region has been had a significant and a crucial role. And if the EU, on top of and among other actors, wants to have a strategy for itself, it's important to have a holistic, comprehensive perspective to include all the players, not just focusing on one side like GCC or Iran. So
Exactly. I totally agree with you. Javad, I would like to say thank you so much for being my guest. This information that you share with us is crucial to understanding this very, very, very challenging situation regarding energy in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. Javad, where people can contact you?
well, first of all, thanks again from my side as well for having me for this interesting conversation. Currently, I'm working at Talltech, Tallinn University of Technology, the law department, doing lectures, doing research, and my PhD. So they can find me there, and also at the same time, I'm working at SEI Tallinn, the Stockholm Environment Institute, or office in Tallinn, Estonia. Although I should, as a disclaimer, say that whatever I shared was my personal opinion, not affiliated to these two. Mentioned that we are right now working on the last steps of one research, working on the Persian Gulf and EU energy security perspective from the Persian Gulf. And I hope that in near future we can release the report, and then those who are interested in are very much welcome to read the report and then make comment, be in contact with us. Yeah, it's always open. This is Persian Gulf, as I said, and always continuous flow of information and news are coming.
All the listener will be delighted to read your paper. Javad, thank you so much for your time.
So much for having me, and I hope that in the future again we can have another conversation with more updates and with good news, hopefully, from Persian Gulf and the world of energy.
Oh, certainly we will. I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. Thank you so much, everyone.